Good evening, everyone. My name is Tony Suzo, Superintendent of Schools here at South Hunterdon, and next to me is Mr. Hewitt, our Director of Curriculum Instruction and Assessment. Thank you for joining us. Those that are at home, just a reminder, we will be recording this presentation as well, and it will be available. I'll send it out tomorrow along with the presentation, and then it will also get posted on our website and be available for future viewing. So at this point, I am going to turn it over to Mr. Hewitt. He's going to walk you through our presentation for the evening. And again, for folks that are at home, at the end, if you have any questions, feel free to email Mr. Hewitt, and he can kind of follow up with you with any questions you may have. So Mr. Hewitt, I'll turn it over to you, and again, thank you.
Great, thanks Mr. Suzo. It's great to be here tonight. I know there's been a lot of talk and conversation around the new standards that have come out. Officially, they actually were released June 3rd, 2020. But due to the pandemic and a lot of other things, they've been delayed for implementation. And it's not just the comprehensive health and physical education standards that were revised back in June of 2020, but most of the standards outside of ELA, which is English Language Arts and Mathematics, were all revised slightly to be updated. But the health standards particularly had some concerns from some stakeholders that we thought we'd have an opportunity to address this evening. So I thank you for being here or for watching from home. And as Mr. Suzo said, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Anybody here in the room that has questions throughout the evening, feel free to ask as we go. Our objectives tonight, really there's a few of them. One of them is to be able to communicate and collaborate with our stakeholders. We want to make sure that we do, curriculum writing really is a fluid process, and we like to get input from all of our stakeholders. And to also, in doing so, our goal is to provide the best education for your children, for our students. We hope to be able to provide an understanding of what's required through the New Jersey Department of Education and gain insight as to how those requirements are going to be implemented here in our districts. We'll also get a chance to review the curriculum writing process throughout the evening too, just what that looks like to understand where it begins and how we get to the document that ultimately provides instruction for the teachers to follow and facilitate in the classrooms. And I also have quite a few different resources to be able to share in the end of the slide presentation, and this whole slide presentation with those active links will be able to come out through our school messenger tomorrow, so you'll get a chance to see those and explore those resources a little bit further as well. So, what New Jersey law is already based in all of our standards, not just the health and physical education standards. There's the Untitled law, which is really a focus on making sure that African Americans are, and their contributions are acknowledged throughout all curriculum in all standards, not just health and PE, but everywhere. Specifically in social studies is really where you'll see this. The Holocaust law also has come out that talks about making sure that at age-appropriate levels in all elementary and secondary schools, that students do have an understanding of the Holocaust, and at the very primary grade levels, obviously that looks very much like just acceptance and inclusion of everyone. And then the LGBT and disabilities law is another law that's been embedded throughout all curriculum as well, and specifically in the middle and high school levels is where the requirement lies. And there's big pieces of the LGBTQ plus law that kind of gets more defined in the health and physical education standards, which we'll talk about tonight, which is where a lot of the questions have come from our stakeholders too. But that is something, just celebrating people with disabilities as well as members of the LGBTQ community, contributions throughout our curriculum is something that is more prevalent now as a result of this law. There's lots of other laws too. So just a little bit of history with the health and physical education standards were last updated and put out in 2014. And before even 2014, there's a number of different laws that were enacted that are requirements already in our curricula. You'll see here in grades K through 12, so both elementary and secondary schools are required to cover these topics: the accident and fire prevention, bullying prevention programs, cancer awareness, domestic violence education, drugs, alcohol, tobacco, controlled dangerous substances, and anabolic steroids. All of this is something that's addressed throughout all grade levels and specific to that, and you'll see it in the health standards. Continuing with that list, in particularly at the elementary level, K-5, gang violence prevention is a requirement. In grades 7 through 12, breast self-examination, dating violence education, and then at the high school level, CPR and AED instructions is required, as well as organ donation, information about organ donation, and that option is also required. Additional laws that have been enacted prior to 2014, the 2014 standards. The law does not specify a grade level, but it does require that we provide education around Lyme disease prevention, sexual assault prevention, stress abstinence, and we particularly, I put on the side here in SHRSD, 6th grade through 12th grade, that is written into the health standards. That is where we start to talk about sexual reproduction. And so that's where abstinence is stressed, that meets this law's requirement. Suicide prevention. And now we move into laws that were enacted beyond and after 2019 that would be implemented in this coming school year, 2022-23, and specific to the health standards. One is the law called consent, and again, this is an active link. I won't click on it now, but it brings you right to that direct law. This is specific to grades 6 through 12, and it does, as you can see on the screen, require that the law and meaning of consent for physical contact and sexual activity is part of the district's implementation within specifically the health and physical education standards. And it's really about increasing, as you see, discussion and awareness that consent is required before physical contact or sexual activity. And this ties in the social emotional learning pieces as well, as you see here. In addition to that, one of the newer laws is around mental health. This again enacted and put in place in the health curriculum for the standards that were released in 2020 to be implemented in 22-23. And this is kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. And we'll look at a template of our curricula later, but you'll notice that all of the social emotional learning competencies are embedded throughout all of our curricula documents that are now updated. But this is also talking about promoting health and well-being and human dignity. But it really does talk about both the connection between physical and mental health. Another law that's required, the New Jersey Safe Haven Infant Protection Act. That link will take you to a site that explains it a little bit. It is specific to high school levels, grades 9 through 12, and this is basically the ability that anybody that gave birth to a child will be able to drop the child off at a safe location, like a healthcare facility, a police office, someplace that's 24 hours open to be able to, if it was a child that they had that they no longer wanted to or were able to care for. In addition to that, sexting is another law now that it's required to be addressed in both middle school at some point. I'm sure that you've seen and heard stories about things with sexting, which is basically can go along with cyberbullying, but also just the increase in the use of technology and students' safety with the use of technology. But the importance now, due to the data that's come out and things, it's required now that we discuss the dangers of sexting and also make sure that students are aware of those dangers and obviously to encourage and let them know the consequences of those kinds of behaviors. Sexual abuse and assault awareness and prevention education is another now law that's been enacted that is for preschool through 12th grade. At the very young ages, this is sometimes put out there as far as like good touch versus bad touch and things like that. At the upper grades, you get into even like sex trafficking and so forth, some of the higher level crimes. So that brings us to the 2020 New Jersey Student Learning Standards in Comprehensive Health and Physical Education that have been released. And so all of those laws, obviously, there's a lot of them. So there's a lot that's embedded throughout these standards and all of our standards. But there are some, my point in showing you all of that is these are laws that have been put in place that we are addressing as a district, that as a law being a requirement. There's a link in the slide presentation specifically to the set of standards, and I'm just going to click on that real quick just to kind of give you an idea of what a set of standards looks like. We're not going to go through the whole document. It's 66 pages long, but I wanted to kind of scroll through. It does give you the basis of how the standards are set up, a nice summary of what they're all about, a mission, vision, and it breaks down the way the standards have been designed, but I'm scrolling down because, what am I? I'm on page 4 of the document where it starts to talk about each of the different concepts and very generally gives you a broad idea of what's expected by the end of each grade level. And it breaks those out from personal growth and development to pregnancy and parenting and so on. And you'll see that as I scroll through, there's a number of different areas that are focuses, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a future slide. But if I keep going, we'll also see later, specifically this area, I'm just stopping on page 16, for the comprehensive health and physical education practices. There are 10 of them, and you'll see in our slide deck the list of the 10 different practices, which are very general and really the essence or backbone, I think it's described as, of the standards. But I wanted to show you where it was in the actual standards on page 16 because it gives you a nice description of what each of those looks like, each of those practices. All right, so some of the basic changes from 2014 through to now to the 2020 standards, which again will be implemented in the fall, September 2022. First off, we just looked through where it showed like bands and what would be done by the end of a certain grade level. So in the previous standards, there were 6 grade level bands. They had preschool, which was a standalone grade level. And then from there, they had a K-1-2 grade level band, a 3-4 grade level band, 5-6, 7-8, and then 9 through 12 is like a high school grade level band. They've condensed that into 4 grade level bands. And so now preschool, kindergarten, first and second grade are all kind of put into that one bundle, and it's listed as to be taught by the end of second grade. And then the next set of grade level bands is 3rd, 4th, and 5th to be taught by the end of 5th grade, and then 6th, 7th, and 8th, the true middle school. The state looks at 6th graders as middle schoolers, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade are all considered middle school, and then a 9 through 12 grade level band as a high school grade level band. And I'm kind of stressing that in the sense that as we talk about all of these standards, and this will be reiterated again too, but because there's a certain standard in, say, the grade level brand that is pre-K through second grade, it doesn't mean that that standard is addressed in preschool as well as kindergarten as well as first grade as well as second grade. We have the ability as a district to say, well, we feel, although the state's requiring that all students be exposed to this and learn about this by second grade, in some cases it may be something that we decide we're going to put in second grade because developmentally that's the best place for it. It doesn't mean that there aren't pieces of it that could be offered earlier in earlier grade levels, like I talked about earlier with good touch, bad touch, versus going all the way up to something like sexting and human trafficking and things, which would be a much higher level, grade level lesson for students. But you can kind of grow those skills and that knowledge but the state does not require us to do it in every single grade level. It's by the end of those grade levels. Again, I mentioned this. These will go into effect in September 2022. And then they've really broken the standards down into both disciplinary concepts and core ideas. So in other words, what is it? And then what should students be able to come away with or being able to do? And there's an example here. I just pulled one where the core idea is all living things may have the capacity to reproduce. The performance expectation, or what the student should come away with, in one of the standards it says define reproduction. So define being that verb, that's what they should be able to do. They should be able to define that term. And another standard under that same core idea is explain the way in which parents may care for their offspring, animals, people, fish, and so forth. So those two performance expectations are all underneath the core idea. And basically, I wanted to share that, and this is a second grade, so when you look at the standard, you'll notice this is in 2.1, which we'll talk about in a minute as well, and that 2 right here represents the grade level. So by the end of second grade, second graders should be able to define reproduction. And they're not talking like the very scientific reproduction term. They're talking about the fact that in order for offspring to be able to be present, basically, you need to have two different individuals, two living individuals. Living things take two different parts to come together to create something new. And so it can be explained as simple as that. In looking at animals, people, fish, they don't list it, but plants or other living things, we can talk about how plants reproduce. That's called reproduction, when a plant produces a baby, or two adults produce a baby, or two animals produce a baby. That's called reproduction. Other changes, there were a whole lot of, I mentioned that 2.1 earlier. We had all the way through 6 different real standards, and now in the 2020 standards, there's 3 sets of standards. One that focuses on personal and mental health, one that focuses on physical wellness, and one that focuses on safety. So they've taken those 6 different standards and kind of condensed them into these 3 key areas. So the first one has these 5 bullets under it. I'm not going to read them to you, but personal and mental health is composed of these different areas, which again, I think is some of the areas that we're here to really talk about. And this presentation does focus more K-8 because a lot of the changes and concerns and questions that I've heard are more at the primary grade levels. So that's where I've focused this presentation. Physical wellness. This is physical education. This is your PE class for your children. And safety focuses in these 4 different areas. The alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs, dependency, substance disorder, and treatment. Those areas I've had some questions around. I mean, these standards did come out in June of 2020. However, they were written in 1819, so long before some of the other changes that have happened in our world around some drugs, particularly marijuana, and things like that. There also was a question that I recently received that we won't get into later in the presentation, so I thought I'd bring it up here, specific about, we talk about prevention of utilizing substances and alcohol and drugs and so forth, and the awareness of the dangers. And I did have a concern that the standards don't specifically state that, just because you see mom or dad having a beer or a glass of wine, that doesn't mean that they have a substance abuse problem. That there is that ability, that differentiation between what's acceptable and what does abuse mean, and what does a true disorder look like, and things like that. So that may not be specifically stated in the standards, but that is something as a district we can kind of incorporate within our curriculum to make sure that our students understand, just because they see someone in their family or a loved one of age having a drink, that it doesn't mean that they have a problem. These are those 10 health and physical education practices that are the the backbone of the new standards, and I'm just going to bring them all up here. There are 10 of them, but you'll notice a lot of it is around just being a successful member of society and fitting in, having the awareness of what a healthy relationship looks like, being able to resolve conflicts, making sure that they understand what a healthy lifestyle looks like, and then this number 7, 8, and 9 really are almost directly tied to some of our social emotional learning competencies around how students, the skills that students need to be able to take care of themselves, set goals for themselves, manage their own behaviors, make good decisions. And then the last one, again, the technology tools and the responsibility there. Again, these are the health and physical education practices, but this is where cyberbullying could come in. This is where sexting comes in and things like that, and making sure we practice digital citizenship. Just a couple of terms that I thought I would put out there because I feel like they're interchanged sometimes. The word standards, which we've talked about, curriculum, and then resources, and what that really looks like. So standards, just in general definition, they're the learning goals that basically are required of us to address here in our district. These are put out there by the state, and what we're expected to make sure students know before they leave us and be able to apply. That's like the big umbrella. Then there's the curriculum, which as a district, we write ourselves. And you'll notice in the definition it says standards-based, because we utilize those standards of all this information that we're required to deliver to students, and we plan a set of experiences or lessons, instruction, for students to be able to become proficient and understand that information that was in the standards, and show us that they can apply those skills. And then resources, I thought was an important term to bring up too, which seems silly. I know you know what resources are. However, the resources sometimes and curriculum become synonymous in sometimes, and I hear it in school buildings, I hear it in the community, I hear it in different places. But, and the best example I can think of is in math, often you have a program that is, right now we use Envision Math at the elementary schools or Open Up Resources at the middle school. That's a program, that's not a curriculum, but I often hear people refer to that as a curriculum. The curriculum tells you what we need to address and how we might address it, but that program is a resource that we would utilize to help deliver the curriculum. So I just thought that that was important, and I think a lot of what may be a concern and why we're focusing in the health area now is around some of the resources that may be out there that may be assumed that we're going to be using within our curriculum. Because our curriculum often lists a number of links and things that are all almost like a bank of resources to choose from. And I just want to put out there that we do put a lot of time and energy and effort into looking at resources, vetting resources. We want them to be age appropriate, number one, but also be able to really identify the information that's required of us to deliver to students. So that's really important. We also make it a point that they're sensitive to social emotional needs of learners, which goes along with the appropriateness. But I just think that that's really important, because just because it's listed somewhere doesn't mean it's always going to be used either. We do need to differentiate for the students in front of us, as well as the questions that come up naturally in conversations. Sometimes you might pull different resources, and resources are always changing. We don't want to be so specific with resources in the sense that something happens and now we can't use it because it wasn't written in the curriculum or something like that. So we have to be sensitive to new and ever-changing resources, especially today with technology. And there's so many available resources out there and networks that teachers are a part of that there's a lot of great resources that are uncovered all the time. And so a curriculum, going back to what we get to develop on how we deliver the standards, really is, again, fluid and something that we're constantly looking to revise and refresh and keep up to date. So the process. So those are kind of some of the terms. So how do we get to that curricular document? First off, the state will obviously release the standards as they did back in June 2020, and they identify what needs to be addressed in each grade level. And in this case, because in this case it's by grade level band, not necessarily every single grade level. You'll see some standards written like English, language, arts, or math. It says in first grade you do this, in second grade you do this, whereas and science is that same way as well, but with health and PE, as well as many of the other related arts areas, it's all within grade level bands by the end of a certain grade level that information's delivered. So that gets released from the state. And then we basically take that information and we have the chance to review those standards, and we get to identify who would be the appropriate staff members to be working on creating the curriculum, writing the curriculum, and we utilize a district template, which I'm just gonna open here. So this is a state-approved district template, and it's completely blank right now, just to kind of give you an idea. It's got the course, the summary of the course at the start, which is just a blurb, which at the middle school, high school level is the blurb that goes into our program of studies. It lists which teachers were the authors of it. If there's a supervisor, that person's listed. I'm listed as the director of curriculum assessment instruction. And then there's the board approval date, so you can see how recently it was updated. And then in this space, it's just all the standards that will be addressed in that curriculum for that grade level. Below that, we go into essential questions. Essential questions are really the big idea of what's going to be answered. Typically, how or why type questions, very open-ended questions, just a big umbrella arching, going back to where we were in the standards when we looked at the tables that said by the end of second grade and there were only a couple of bullets. Same idea. It's almost like those statements in the form of a question, just big, broad umbrella ideas. And then we look in the next section where we identify connections to our 21st century themes and skills and career readiness practices. We include those specifically here, and we specifically put in every document the social emotional learning competencies and sub-competencies. And as teachers work to write the curriculum, when they focus on this unit within this document, they're highlighting by bold-faced and italicizing which are most specific to that unit, because we want to keep everything fresh in our minds as we're delivering this instruction when it comes to career readiness practices and social emotional learning competencies, but we also want to highlight where the focus is, because to try to cover everything in every unit is a lot. Then it gets into the instructional plan, pre-assessments, the actual objectives and strategies, and under student learning strategies is where you would see sample activities of what would be used to deliver that instruction, how you're going to formatively assess. That's assessment that you do while you're teaching to see, okay, what more do my students need to learn? And then you have a bank of resources to pull from to help address those needs. It also provides a space in our curriculum for modifications for all of our different learners in the classroom. And then the summative assessments, which is the end to see, okay, now did they understand everything that we had taught along the way? These are the summative assessments that get scored, graded, and end up ultimately in a grade book. And then the state also requires interdisciplinary connections, which is great because we try to make those connections throughout our curriculum. You'll often see English language arts listed there, but then science, technology, social studies, and other areas, and you'll see those connections. And then at the end of each of the documents, in this case, you would see those 10 practices for health and PE listed here, so that those practices are again highlighted in each of the documents where they apply. So basically, we take the standards, we then get staff together and time for them to work on writing the curriculum in that document. What I showed you is one unit of what can be up to 7, 8 units. Sometimes it's 4 units, 1 per marking period. So depends on the curriculum and the amount of information and instruction available within the schedule. Then that curricula that's been written by those staff members is reviewed by myself and other administrators. Then take it to the Curriculum and Technology Committee with the select board members to review it, and we have an opportunity to discuss it, ask questions. Sometimes we go back for some revisions, come back again, and ultimately it then ends up on a board agenda for full approval by the full board. And then it becomes a document that we're able to post on our website, and I was going to show you on our district website. There is under district curriculum, assessment, and instruction, pre-K to 12 curriculum, and it actually takes you right into a Google Drive, but these are all of our curricular documents categorized by content area and things. So I wanted to show you how to access that if you were interested for any of our curriculum. And if you ever can't find something that's there, please reach out to me because I'd be happy to send you a copy of the document. All right, so now we get into the actual standards and the changes by grade level. So by the end of grade 2, you'll notice some of the changes, and I've highlighted here the ones that I think I've had the most questions around. And you'll notice, like, there's the one that under pregnancy and parenting, define reproduction, discussing the range of ways people express their gender and how gender role stereotypes may limit behavior. And again, this is by the end of grade 2. However, what we're really looking at in kindergarten, first and second grade at this level is just making sure we're accepting everybody for who they are, for how they look, for how they choose to act, or how they represent themselves. The gender role stereotypes and things such as the stereotype saying a girl's favorite color can't be blue. A boy's favorite color can't be pink. Those are kind of general role stereotypes. In preschool, if a girl wants to play with trucks, if a boy wants to play with a doll, those stereotypes and things, and having conversations with kids and understanding that that's all okay. You know, we're all here in a community to respect and accept one another for who they are. Those kinds of things are some of the changes. One of the things I think too that stood out was list medically accurate names for body parts, including the genitals, is what got added in second grade, or by the end of second grade. That's certainly something where the terms would be utilized in second grade, but in very general terms. The term vagina and penis may be mentioned, but they're not going to go into real specific terms. A lot of this too, I have to say, we do as a district respect the fact that families have values and have conversations at home as well. And many times, I can speak from experience, when I was principal in Lambertville, I got to teach the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade boys at that time some of these lessons, and I can tell you they have really good questions. And how many times the response was, that's a great question, you should talk to a parent at home about that if you want to learn more. And it's less about, it's how you guide those discussions. And having those conversations with teachers and working through the curriculum and the writing process, we have those conversations, we're able to address them, but we always also encourage you to please reach out with any questions that may come up from your own child at home too. So those are the changes by the end of second grade. By the end of 5th grade, you'll notice it goes on to 2 slides. There are more changes, and some of them are very subtle, and some of them maybe aren't even real changes, but more or less just things that people have questioned before, so I thought it was important to put here. One of the things I will say that the state did mention is that things that are listed in parentheses are there just as that, as examples of things that could be presented in a classroom, not necessarily things that have to be presented. If it's not in parentheses, we do need to address those topics and those conversations. This is also by the end of 5th grade. And differentiating between sexual orientation and gender identity is really, there's some great lessons, and you'll see resources later, but one that's coming to mind that I was just telling Mr. Suzo I came across recently was one, it's a storybook that basically around gender identity, and the main character in the story is a crayon, and the crayon actually is blue, but it has a red wrapper. And so it goes through trying to color red because its wrapper is red and it says red on the wrapper. And it's a great story in explaining how this inanimate object may look like one thing, but actually feel very different on the inside or come out very differently. And so through reading storybooks and things, and literacy is huge, or literature I should say, is huge in sometimes just guiding those discussions and then having very scripted and prompted questions, which we'd be able to put into the curricular documents for teachers to guide those discussions too. But there's lots of different ways where when you initially see something around sexual orientation or gender identity, I think sometimes people at these primary grade levels see that and think it's going to get very, very specific, and that's not the case. Our goal is exposure and understanding that these are topics and these are people that will be experiencing, that all have different feelings and different values, different beliefs, are different people that basically we want to make sure that students are prepared to be able to respect and accept. And then by the end of 8th grade, again, a couple of slides that I'll give you a chance to just read through. And again, not all of this, and by the end of 8th grade, are things that have really fully changed, but some of the standards that we've had more questions about. Some of the things, if you look at 2.18 SSH8, and in the parentheses they talk about body image, self-esteem, alcohol, and other substances and things like that. Again, those things are in parentheses, but these are some of the topics that are real important and tied directly, again, to social emotional learning. In fact, when the social emotional learning competencies had first been released, there was a lot of question around, well, how are these different? It seems like these are already embedded in the health standards. And all of those competencies really are embedded in the health standards, that social emotional learning piece, that connection to physical well-being and just healthy lifestyles and understanding of our bodies. And things is so important in how to treat our bodies in a healthy way. But the social emotional learning competencies then were sort of pulled out and now and put so that it's not only in health but in all content areas, like you saw in our template for our curriculum. So here's our goal. I will read this. As a district, our goal is to prepare students for life outside of the classroom and within our district community as well as the global community. This requires our students to be aware of the diversity within our district community and aware of the diversity throughout our world. We are committed to making sure that all students are in a comfortable learning environment where they are each respected, where they can ask questions, and learn the various lifestyles, perspectives, beliefs, and values of others. And I think that ultimately, and I've got to say, goal for SHRSD students, you're not going to find this on our website. I wrote this myself, and I did it for the presentation tonight, because as I kind of wrap my head around what is the purpose, what I feel like people need to hear from myself as the director of curriculum, who will be directly responsible for working with the teachers and writing the curriculum and determining how this is delivered, to hear this from me. So these are my words, but this is my vision and my hope in that there's a lot in the health standards. There's a lot of things that people question, and I hope that people do question. I think that's how we get answers. That's how we raise awareness. And I think our students need to be in environments where they're comfortable to be able to ask those questions. And when I say that, I mean all of our students, whether they are cisgender, trans students, different ethnicities, different religious backgrounds, different socioeconomic status, different genders. I just feel that it's really important for all of our students to recognize that all of these other people that may not be exactly like themselves are present, need to be respected, and also have a whole lot of value in our classroom communities and our communities at large, both here in Lambertville and beyond. And then it brings me to a ton of resources, quite honestly. So this is, I broke it down by standards. So this is that 2.1 standard, which is specific to personal and mental health. And there's just lots of great resources here. There's sample lessons. The one down here, welcoming schools. I spoke about the crayon earlier. That lesson is there. There's a number of K2 lessons, 3-5 lessons to really look at and see what would be done at those primary grade levels. When we get into physical wellness, there's also a bunch of different resources here specific to physical education, and then all around safety too. And there are some great, I will say, at this Amaze videos. I was watching some of them at amaze.org junior. You'll see some great videos, and there's an educator and there's a parent tab. And at the parent tab, it's literally like 2-3 minute video clips that answer questions of like how to have these discussions with your children at home. And it's great, and it's great for parents. It's labeled parents, but it's also something I plan to share with teachers too, because it's really just how can adults talk with students, you know, and answer these questions. And it's a great resource. Things to remember. You've heard a lot tonight. So you will be notified prior to the standards that we just outlined here that are kind of in question being taught, and not only notified, but also given the option to say, hey, I don't want my child to be a part of these lessons. That's always been practiced. That's not new with the new standards. When we do the family health lessons, prior to these changes, that was still an option, and that's an option still today. Let's see. And communication is key. If you ever have questions, please be sure to reach out to your child's teacher, reach out to the principal, reach out to myself, reach out to Tony. And I kind of put those in order like that because that's basically the chain of command. You'd want to start with the teacher, the person that's directly working with your child, to hear exactly what's being taught, and you know, and see if there's anything that you need to know that maybe they're seeing in the classroom, you know, that you'd want to know to be able to address at home. And then, of course, the principal, then myself, and then Mr. Suzo. And then to know, too, that there's always supports available, that there are supports available within the schools, from our teachers to our counselors to our nurses to our administration. We do have supports available. Where do we go from here? So next step will be this summer, we'll be working with these new standards. I don't think I mentioned it earlier, but the standards were sent back for review again this spring to the state to say, hey, we want you to review these standards again and make sure that they are age appropriate and so forth. The state completed that review and just released them again without any changes from the initial set of standards, but they just sent them back and said they're good to go, and that was just a couple weeks ago. That's somewhat why we're a little delayed here. The hope was to have a lot of this curriculum writing done prior to the summer, finalized over the summer, but we needed to wait for that review to be done. So this has pushed our writing really to be happening in the summer. And then I'll be taking that draft to the committee, hopefully in July, at the latest August, to be approved in either the July or August full board meeting. And then after that, as Mr. Suzo mentioned at the beginning, we do plan to have a follow-up meeting to be able to review the actual curriculum that was developed. So that's what I've got. Any questions? No.
So
Okay.
that you talked about
Do we plan to teach all of it? We want to be able to expose kids to as much as possible. But it's going to depend on the group of students. And again, by the end of the grade level band, these often what I think those comments or topics that have come up in parentheses are sort of the same things that are going to come up in discussion in the classroom. So will we directly teach it initially? We'll teach the standard, leaving the parentheses piece out, but I can't say that those pieces that are in the parentheses won't come up in discussion. So directly, no. No.
Yeah.
Sure.
Do you want
So you're
the
saying-
mic? Do you want the mic so people at home can hear you?
No,
Or?
that's okay.
Oh.
So I think you said that we can do the specific curriculum
Yeah.
again.
Mm-hmm.
The resources that you are going to put in the curriculum, are you going to list them by preferences, by how you would like for the teachers to go to resource A first, and in order of how you would like it viewed?
I'm not going to put the curriculum resources in like a preferential order or priority order, but what I do plan to do is a lot of work on my own initially to really develop a lot of most curriculum aren't really like scripted, but I do plan to somewhat script a lot of the activities and things that would be more or less the required activities, like this lesson is the lesson to do for this standard, in order to make sure that the standard's met, number one, but then also that we're consistent through the districts with this very, not controversial, maybe it is controversial, but the topics that people have concerns about. So it's very clear what's really being taught for each of those standards of question, or in question. And from there, if the group of students that you're with that year have further questions, you have resources to go to help work with those students that might have further
And so
needs.
with those resources, will teachers be allowed to look for their own resources, or will they be specific to what is listed there? And if they do go find a different resource that they find helpful, will that be approval by administration?
So if there's other resources outside of what's in the curriculum, particularly here, yes, it would need approval. Similar to if in English language arts, a novel's going to change at the high school level or something, the teachers come to me to get approval first prior to just utilizing it. Sure.
Middle school. Actually, let me ask you that. So you're saying that the 4th grade bands, it isn't the intention of the district to teach what's within those grade bands by the end of 2nd grade, by the end of 5th, 8th, hit it in those grade levels, as opposed to kindergarten or 4th grade or whatever happens.
So for example, like if something's by the end of 6th grade, are we going to, or I'm sorry, by the end of 8th grade, are we going to teach it in 6th grade kind of thing? Or are we going to wait till 8th grade for the last possible opportunity? I think it's going to depend on the standard, to be honest, because some really do rely on foundational skills, foundational knowledge. And there's a lot that can be done all the way through, just in a progressive way. So that full standard, even though you might not be teaching specifically that content, that heavier content that might be based on some family values, some students' readiness and so forth, might not be something that you want to teach at that moment, but there's other foundational skills that can be taught to lead up to that. So it might be working towards that standard, but actual being secure with it and directly teaching it at the older level, it's going to depend on the standard, but that may happen with some of them, yeah.
So in our district, right now, 6th grade is separate, but the 7th, from what I'm remembering, 7th and 8th grade, do they have 12 class together?
Not,
Or is it flipped?
they
I remember
kind of
sometimes you
flip.
have sex ed in 7th grade, and then you flip it.
They have flipped for different grade levels depending on It's been different over the years.
So I guess my question is, the maturity level of a seventh grader is much different than the maturity level of an eighth grader.
Hmm. And time of year too, within the school year. So the scope and sequence of when things are taught throughout a year is also important. So all of that, I think a lot of these questions I could answer better after we write the curriculum, you know, and we go through that process and really get in deep with each of the standards.
Generally, do you think that a seventh grader is going to be learning about oral and anal sex?
Sure.
I mean, personally, I think that's a heavier topic that will come in more in the eighth grade year. Just
That's,
and being a former health educator myself in my previous life, that's something I think would fit probably better in eighth grade. So I think that's kind of where you're going with those questions
is where
about,
we're going with
you
that
know,
question.
I think it's up to us as the professionals to really make that decision of age appropriate, where that will land, and developmentally when the kids are ready to, you know, be able to handle that type of
My concern
conversation.
too is sometimes there's a history of, well, that's the way we've done it. So I don't want to, you know, I
I
don't
think-
want to see a seventh grader learning about these heavy
I think it's a little. I think this is a
Mhm.
little different, you know, of where we're going. I mean, I don't, and kind of to go back to your question before, I think one of the concerns would be like teachers going rogue on their own and just being, and I think that with this particular topic, it will be very, you know, approved resources. You know, there's going to be a process to this and an expectation.
And to be honest, I think teachers are looking for that. They
Yeah,
want
I
the
agree.
scripted piece because it is, you know, it's new for them too. They're covering new topics. So to have new resources that they know, okay, this is something that I know is okay to teach in this way, and it's going to be acceptable to teach this way, and you know that's our district's requirement. That's somewhat comforting and as well.
And so if a child or a student is uncomfortable during the lesson, what ability will they have to walk out?
They can talk to the teacher. We've had it before, situations, and they can either go to a counselor, go to the library, we'll work out, you know, something, but they have that option. That's happened before.
But I mean, like in the middle of class.
Yeah, that's happened
Mhm.
before, yep.
Okay.
And that's not just in health classes. That's happened in
Yeah.
other places too. You know, things are going on, and it's just I need to take a break from this. You know, and it's been fine.
And then my last question is, so you're talking about notification for parents. Are you going to be specific with exactly grade level notifications? Again, I've talked about this with
Mhm.
notifying parents beforehand so they can have a conversation and after, and not just a general cookie cutter form letter.
Mhm. Yeah, we have talked about that, and I spoke with teachers about that too at the elementary level too, and looking at in the curriculum writing process is really when that will take place too. That'll be a resource, is the parent letter that will be more specific as far as what's happening and in that grade level. So yes.
But K through 12 or just elementary level?
So yes, yes. I mean, part of this is because parents have the option to opt out of some of these standards or some of the topics in health that they're not comfortable with, and that's at any grade level. So there needs to be a letter throughout the district for health classes. Sure.
I don't really have a question, but I mean, I'm struck with, Mr. Hewitt, you were saying early on about, before I came here tonight, I was telling my fifth grader, so she's not so young, where I was going, and I was sort of explaining, and I said, well, people are worried about this stuff in the early grades about, sort of letting everybody know that they're with how, I mean, these standards are beyond what they were before, but it's, I think it's always been sensitive. I know people have always been concerned in the past about a lot of these different questions, but I mean, I feel comfortable, and especially knowing who our teachers are, who we have in charge, I think, that I feel confident, and also the level of communication I feel like we got from both of you. I do feel like I will know what's coming and can address that if I, you know, if I have any concerns. So yeah. Oh, and just one thing I want to say, you've done so well, because I always say to my oldest, never put anything online, you know, and she's like, oh my God, if the school tells me this one more time. So good job there.
That's good to hear. Thank you. Well, I think that concludes our evening then. I thank everyone from home for watching and listening in. Please know that this will come out, the recording as well as the slide deck. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Thanks. Have a good night.